Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today, I had an incredibly interesting conversation, and what it really gets down to is the dark depths that political control will go down to. Just where are the shadows? How dark can it be? And today, we're pretty much just talking about the Chinese Communist Party and an arts group, a performance group. They're known as Shen Yun. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you for the few minutes of introduction that you've just given me. So, how are things for you today?
Things are great. Yeah, we're in New York, a little cold, um, but things are great. The sun is shining.
That's good. That's good. As we were just talking, and we were talking about how I kind of like to go in with things cold. So, my first question is this: could be, where does it start for you? Where did the whole explain like everything from the beginning?
Sure. I was born in Ohio,
Yeah.
but I grew up all over the place, traveled a lot. And then I was actually a baseball player growing up, and I was a
Wow.
serious baseball player. Yes, not as good as cricket, I know, but I really liked it. And I was a pitcher. And what I found was in baseball, especially back then, and this is the 90s, they train a lot your technique, right? Your mechanics of pitching and your physicality, your conditioning. But then when you listen to the really top athletes in any sport, your Michael Jordans, Tiger Woods, your Greg Maddux in
Yeah.
baseball, and they say it's 90% mental. I said, but nobody teaches that, especially back then. Now you actually have it as especially in top performance athletes, they have coaches for it. But back then there was nothing, a couple of books. So I picked those up and I started getting interested in the mental side of the game and meditation and visualization. And I found it had a tremendous impact on my performance. And then slowly over time, as I moved away from baseball, growing up, I had injuries, this and that. And I became more interested in this mental side of things and in meditation and in Eastern philosophy. And I dabbled in yoga and I learned Tai Chi and Qigong and Buddhist practices. And eventually I became interested in Falun Gong meditation. I didn't know anything about what was happening in China. I didn't know anything about the human rights elements. I just knew this was a mind body meditation exercise practice, and it was free. Now, this is cool. I don't have a lot of money. I'm still kind of a student. And so I started practicing it. And then I really enjoyed it. I found it was very helpful for me mentally, spiritually. And then I learned that actually people who practice it in China are being brutally persecuted. And so I started doing some things to try to raise awareness. At this time, I was in California. I was starting college, and I said, well, let me learn Chinese language and learn more about Chinese history so I can understand the practice more and I can talk about it more in a more educated way and learn the context for all of this. And so I started learning Chinese and Chinese history. This is at Pomona College in outside Los Angeles. And I would do all kinds of things, like actually went to Beijing. I went to Tiananmen Square and I meditated in public, and I was immediately arrested and beaten up and
Wow.
thrown into detention center. This is 2001. I got the foreigner treatment. You know, if I were Chinese, I would have just disappeared. That would have been the last you would have heard of me. But I got kicked out, and the policeman who was beating me up, the look in his eyes was that, oh, I so wish I could kill you right now, but I can't because you're white and you have a foreign passport. And he had to be taken away by another policeman because he was getting too violent. I mean, I got the whole good cop, bad cop. Who organized you? How, is the CIA behind this? I'm like, no, I paid for my ticket. I actually had, book my own flight, book my own hotel. I did all this on my own. But they were like, oh no, come on, who's really behind this? Like, no, I don't know what you've been told, but I just did this myself. Actually did it with a few friends and we just organized ourselves. It was our own idea. Anyway, so then I started doing more things. At this point, of course, I'm blacklisted in China. I can't go back there. I've been to Hong Kong and Taiwan a lot since. And I started studying this more seriously. And so to make a long story short, because there's a lot to get into, it's been, a couple of decades. I ended up getting my master's degree in international relations from the London School of Economics. And I learned more about human rights in China and atrocities there, studying and working in Asia. I interviewed refugees who just escaped persecution. Some still had scars on them throughout East Asia, especially in Thailand and Hong Kong and Taiwan and Cambodia. And then at this time, I was kind of more in an academic career path. Both my parents are professors. I figured, okay, I'll just take an academic path and really write about this because it's being covered up in the media. And
Mm.
that was one of the things that really interested me. I actually studied And one of the things that really caught on is I did this graph, which you can find online, which is the number of people who were persecuted to death, basically usually from torture and later from for their organs. As it goes up, the number of articles in the West goes down.
Yeah.
And there's a professor at the London School of Economics who coined a phrase for this called compassion fatigue. And that would be the simplest explanation. You know, it's news in the beginning. Okay, more people are being killed in China, we know. And then so it's not a story, but there was more to it in addition to that because there was so much business interest in China. And there was such an agenda to get into the market there. And there were certain topics you could not touch. And there were journalists who wanted to cover this story, and they were told by their own paper, let's say the New York Times in particular, do not cover this. Do not touch the organ harvesting of Falun Gong story. Do not talk about the propaganda of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, being false. And so I was really interested in that. I was going in that direction. I'm happy to chat more about that. And then in 2005, and then again in 2006, there was this really early form of a performance that was put together by artists who lived outside of China for the Chinese New Year. They called it the Chinese New Year Gala. And it was just the idea was, hey, the Chinese embassy has their Chinese New Year performance, but it's all very literally all red. It's all about how great the Communist Party is and how wonderful things are in China, and the costumes are red, the lighting is red, everything is red. And so this does not represent us at all. Let's have our own performance that celebrates traditional Chinese culture. We need an MC. And so a friend of mine contacted me and said, hey, will you MC this? I said, what are you talking about? There are people being murdered
Mm.
just en masse in China. We're looking at whether this is genocide. We're looking at international law. I'm not going to go do some dance and song production. What is this? This is not a time to celebrate. This is a time to stop people from being killed. She said, no, 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 come on, come on. It'll be great. It'll be fun. And she was just really adamant. And so it was phone call after phone call. In the end, it became easier to just say, you know what? Fine. Just get off my case. I'll do the show and then leave me alone. And I did it. And at that time, it was mostly Chinese people, diaspora people in Los Angeles who came to see the show. So I was doing a lot of speaking Chinese. I cracked some joke, Confucius said this and that in Chinese, and they loved that. The white guy who speaks Chinese, especially back then, 20 something years ago, was not that common. And then the next year, they had a performance at Radio City Music Hall in New York, which not only has a long history, it is massive. It is 7,000 people in the audience. It's got this 5-ton curtain that comes down. The stage goes up and down. And they asked me to do that. And at this time I was in London. And so I flew back. I did that. I guess they got the tape of the previous performance. And then it became so successful that they said, you know what, let's create a company and start this full time. And so that summer, this is 2006, they formed Shen Yun Performing Arts. And this was created about 2 hours outside New York City, in the area called the Hudson Valley here, which is kind of rolling hills, wooded. We have a lot of wildlife. It's a big area. Um, and they created this performing arts company, and I joined, and I didn't know exactly what it would be. I just knew I was going to be an MC for it. And we had tryouts, and I got the gig. And then we started touring at the end of 2006 and into 2007. This was our first world tour. And we did about 100 shows all over the world. We skipped the United Kingdom that year. But we came back the next year.
Well, you've got
And
to polish the performance
it,
before you
it,
put it before the main audience. You see, it's the right
yes,
thing
that's
to
right.
do.
Yes, you got in the United States. You have to play in Peoria, Illinois. It's the first place you got to go. So yes, you can't just bring it to London right away. No.
um,
And so basically, it started becoming this performance. I've been with the company ever since, 18 years now.
I just want to backtrack a little bit because one of the things I find frustrating is, especially the more podcasts I've done, is, and especially in this political climate we're in now, and I'm not trying to have a political dig at anything or anyone, but it really can wind me up when people will get really upset about current problems. Won't mention China. Won't mention anything about China
Hmm.
whatsoever. And I don't want you to relive it like word for word, but just want could you just explain to people that when you're getting arrested in China, 'cause so for context, I used to go to Moscow a lot. I used to go to Russia a lot. I've been to Moscow 5
Mm.
times. All right. Never had any problems, but I also knew not to mess around. I had friends there. I had a girlfriend that lived there, and stuff like that. So I didn't really have to do the tourist traps, and by and large, 100% left alone from the police. But it was always made clear to me by friends Don't get involved in anything. Don't try and be a hero. If you do get approached by a police officer, make sure you've got your documents. Don't try to hide anything, because if they
Mm-hmm.
decide you're a problem, it's going to be nothing like you've experienced before in the West. You know, and like I said, I've only got positive experiences to talk about when the 5 times that I've been to Moscow. Yeah. But they were always
Mm-hmm.
like, these are the rules, and they apply to
Yeah.
everybody. And very similar, they said the only difference is if you were Russian, there might be a problem. Whereas you, when they finish beating you up, they'll drop you off at the embassy.
Yes.
and
Yes.
and I
That's
just
right.
and that's what I just want you to explain to people, that you're in the just literally just meditating in the middle of the square, and there is no you need to move on, you need to stop. It's just I hope you're ready for the kick in that's coming your way.
Yes. Yeah. They picked me up, put me in a police van, and they took me to the detention center right next to Tiananmen Square there in the heart of Beijing. And there were blood stains on the walls. There were
Yeah,
handprints and blood all over the walls. And they took me to this back room, just like a scene out of a movie with the metal table and the lamp and shining at your face, and the whole thing and interrogation and a kick to the groin, the slap across the face and up and down and then all these various scare tactics. And then they tried to get me to I went on hunger strike immediately as soon as I was imprisoned, and they tried to get me to eat and try to get that on camera. And of course, as soon as they brought the food, they brought the cameras behind them to record how well I was being treated. And I got when they eventually kicked me out. I'm assuming because of pressure from the international embassies. They put me on a plane. I had only one shoe because I took my shoes off to meditate. They only brought one shoe back. So I'm limping. I got the one shoe. I cannot speak at this point that my jaw was dislocated. I'm looking over at my friend. He's got a broken nose and two broken fingers. Another person's got broken ribs. And they give us a China Daily English propaganda newspaper. And it has this report. A group of foreigners was sent by anti-China foreign forces, including the CIA. They were treated well, put up in a hotel, and sent back on a plane. And I'm reading this like, oh, that's how easy propaganda is, apparently. You just lie and say whatever you want, and the truth doesn't matter to most of the people who don't get to know it. And that was, it wasn't unexpected because I knew what the reality is, and a lot of people, including my family, tried to dissuade me from going. They said they're going to plant drugs in your backpack. They could, you'll never come back. They thought I was committing suicide going there. So like I said, I got the easy treatment, not the local one, but I experienced it firsthand. And then over the years with Shen Yun, I see a lot of this as well in terms of the type of sabotage that we're facing. We're getting death threats, tire slashing, all these operations that the Chinese embassies and consulates around the world are doing, and I can give you some stories about that. So I see it, and then like you're saying, it's not covered in the media. It's not doesn't make headlines, and there's an active effort to cover it up, and the cover up is not just by Beijing and all their various operatives and agents and the bribes, but actually by people in the West, in the US, in England, everywhere else, who want access and who want to have a political narrative. And this could be politicians, it could be editors of newspapers, journalists. And at the very least, if you want to operate in China, you cannot write about this. If you want to have business with China, you cannot allow these kinds of protests outside in your theater or in your city. And they're very clear about that, and they're very militant about it. And some people just the interests are too much for their spine. Put it that way.
and that's the problem, isn't it? It's not just China per se; it's the cooperation of the international community, who, whilst
It's the
literally,
complicity.
yeah, and they are complicit with trade deals, no sanctions, just complete denial. Oh no, it doesn't happen. It's fine. And this is a country that's rich in genocide. Like, if
Yes,
genocide was a currency, it would be one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest country in the world. And and the only
I've
reason
never
do
heard
you
it put that way.
know, but it's just, and I
Yeah,
know it's a graphic way of putting it, but I don't know how else to explain the Chinese regime.
I mean we're talking about 60 to 80 million people were
Yeah,
killed under the Chinese Communist Party that we know of.
yeah,
So there was a famine that was created by Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party's policy, the Great Leap Forward. And at the time, they claimed it was a natural disaster. Now we know, and there's a very famous book about this by Decotter, who's a British professor. We're talking about 20 to 40 million in that one campaign alone, mostly of starvation and disease by a policy. And then the Cultural Revolution, which wasn't even meant to kill people per se, was meant to destroy culture. Again, we don't know how many millions. And the estimates are 60 to 80, which is more than World War I and II combined everywhere else. And then it's ongoing today. And we still don't know what the numbers are for COVID. I
No.
think we're going to be shocked when we find out what actually happened there. And then all the Uyghurs, what happened to them? All the men have disappeared. So I mean, we don't know what the numbers actually are with Falun Gong. People are saying it could be in the millions. We don't know how many people have been killed for their organs. It's because they block information so well, and they have the great internet firewall. And we do get a lot more information now than we did a few decades ago. But still, it's such a vast country, and they have such tight control. And where is this in the news? Now, of course, what Shen Yun does in a way, being based outside of China, is draw a very clear distinction between China, Chinese culture, Chinese people,
Yeah.
and the Chinese Communist Party. And that's our tagline: China before communism. And the whole idea is, it used to be, if you say, oh, what about COVID? What about Hong Kong? Oh, you're China batching. No, I'm not. I'm just talking about this policy by the Chinese Communist Party and their track record. I could go have Chinese food with my Chinese friend and speak to them in Chinese and talk about COVID, and they'll be more militant about it than I am. How is that China badging? This is a critique of a government,
Yeah.
an illegitimate government. If you actually look at the history of how it came to power, nobody actually asked them to be there. A lot of people don't want them to be there. There's a whole movement now. People call it's called Quit Party, Quit the CCP Tuidang in Chinese, and it's a whole movement with hundreds of millions of people who've signed on to say, out with the Communist Party, that we don't need this. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party says, well, China would fall apart if we were here. It's kind of falling apart with you here. If you look at the
Yeah.
demographics and the economy and the human rights issues, there's a lot to get into. You're absolutely right. The West, I think, had a dream, especially, after Tiananmen, there was like, okay, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And then, okay, well, let's open up China by just being more communicative with them and bringing business in and money. And as when they come to the West and they go back, and especially before the Beijing Olympics, we'll give them the Olympics. We'll do all this stuff. And they'll be great. You'll see what has changed. It's only gotten worse afterwards
Yeah.
because we're being played in many ways. When our officials go to China, they get played. And China, the art of war that was written 2,500 years ago. And the strategies that they use there and the tricks that they use, that is a child's play. Every elementary school child in China knows the 36 stratagems. They're way ahead of us in terms of, we think, oh, if we do this, they'll do that. And if they say this, we'll say that. Cool, here's our strategy. They've thought it out. They're going to make you think that you're winning so that in 20 years down the road, they can do something to you.
I
We're out of
remember.
our league when it comes to fighting with the CCP.
Yeah, I've read that before. They've said that one of the big advantages they have, because they know their leader is going to be there till the day he dies. They're not worried about general elections. They're not worried about being popular, so that they can plan for generations. Whereas our democracy
Yeah,
does not permit a generation strategy. Like, what am I going to do for my great grandchildren? They can do that in China, so that's how they think. They're like, what's my
yeah,
great grandchild going to be doing? And ha-
yeah.
and this is that weird thing that, and again, like you, and you're probably far more frustrated by this than me. I hate the blindness to it, that people are blinkered. It's just like, oh no, because one thing that, and this is probably a good example of what they do really well. China is the best in the world at promoting its own culture, despite the fact it's banned in its own country. But it lets everyone
That's right.
think, everyone
Well,
thinks that there's this China that we all know, and oh, well, thousands of years of history, and the horoscopes, the medicine, and all of this. You can't practice it in China.
that's right. So actually, Shen Yun cannot perform in China. We can.
Yeah,
That's why what we're doing could only be established outside of China. This is exactly your point. They've gotten very good at conflating, or how should we say, hijacking. Let's
mm,
say the CCP has been able to hijack traditional Chinese culture, and then that's why you hear people who actually care about Chinese culture. They almost get upset when you say 5,000 years of history. Like, stop talking to me about 5,000 years. That's just CCP propaganda. Well, in the hands of the CCP, it's propaganda. If you actually talk about it separately, what people in the West find fascinating about China and Chinese culture, for the most part, I think we're going to talk about the spirituality, the Taoist and Buddhist practices,
yeah,
things like Tai Chi, your architecture, your food, Chinese medicine, how all these come together. Of course, you got your zodiac and everything else. You know, there's a lot because it's so rich, and you can pick up a text if you speak Chinese or now through translation from thousands of years ago and read it, understand it. And very few cultures and languages in the world can do that. But the Chinese Communist Party, they knew when they came to power, we are a Soviet import. What we're talking about here is Marxism and militant atheism and utilitarianism and materialism. And of course, you got Stalinism and Leninism and
Yeah,
Maoism, all this stuff. None of this is native to Chinese culture, and none of this gives any space for, let's call it for fun, metaphysical consequences. This idea that there's karma, that
yeah,
there's good is rewarded and evil is punished is an ancient Chinese saying, but what goes around comes around, as we say in the West. And none of this aligns with Marxism. In Marxism, it's all about your bottom line, so to speak, and it's all about power. Ultimately, we know that
mm,
these regimes that have set up Marxism, none of them really actually cared about the people. It's all about the power at the end of the day. And so the first thing they had to do, and they were very clear about this in their writings, is destroy traditional culture. And they call it the four olds: old thoughts, old ideas, old habits. Go out and burn temples to the ground, burn the books, make monks and nuns marry, kill anybody who's educated in this, and raise multiple generations now who are cut off from their culture. And then, of course, Confucianism and Confucius himself at the time during Cultural Revolution was labeled the number one bastard. This is what they called him. And now the CCP is opening Confucius institutes around the world. And there's a movie called In the Name of Confucius that really analyzes this. It's just a propaganda tool. They're usurping traditional Chinese culture to say, look, China is so great. Yeah, China is great. But what have you done to it?
yeah.
You destroyed Confucian traditions, and now you're opening Confucius institutes. And so Shen Yun, when he comes around, we have to first of all make clear we are completely independent of the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, or any government for that matter. We started without any money from any corporation, any government, just a bunch of really skilled and accomplished Chinese artists, many of them who escaped persecution in China, who came together and said, let's do this. Let's bring back this culture. And also, as part of that, let's show what's happening in China today. It's not a big part of the show, but it's definitely in there and very memorable for people. So we show the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners, and we show the courage of their resistance. People like me who are meditating in the park, and what happens to them, and then how they hold on to their faith and their integrity and stand up for what they believe in. And it's very inspiring for people. And so when we do this, these two things of reviving traditional culture the Communist Party destroyed and saying this is our mission to show China before communism and bring it back and show it to the world. And at the same time, show what's happening under communism in China. That makes the CCP very, very afraid of us. And so you say, why is the Communist Party so afraid of a performing arts company? Well, they don't want people to know this stuff. And so they're doing everything they can. And it's really coming to a head the last year or so around the world to try to stop us from performing.
So, what is the performance?
So the performance is really a journey through 5,000 years of civilization all the way to today. So when the curtain comes up, you're instantly transported to another world. Actually, we start up in the heavens with a creation legend, and then people come down to earth and they're in the imperial palace. They kind of came down from the heavens to earth. And then next we have a classical Chinese dance. We have a water sleeves kind of imperial dance. So we have a story from Journey to the West and with the Monkey King and its sidekicks, Pigsy. And then we have an ethnic dance. And it just goes on like that throughout the performance. You have a story about the poet Li Bai. You have a story of, from one of the other pieces of literature and history and a love fairy tale. And then you have a story about things happening today. You have an erhu solo, it's an instrumental piece, and we have live orchestra. And so it's about 20 different vignettes, each about 5 minutes long. And then there's the MCs like myself who come on between the peaks to just give a little bit of background, talk a lot less than I'm talking now, just a couple sentences, get out of the way, and then you see the story. And it's just so fast, you really have no time or mental space to get distracted thinking about your other stuff. So at the very least, you get this little click off of your mind of everything, all the racing thoughts that we have in general. You get placed into this other world, other time, and other land, and it's a land of magic and myths and all these interesting ideas. And what really comes across through the performance is obviously the surface of it is beautiful. The classical Chinese dance, I'm happy to talk about that. It's very, very athletic, very interesting dance form. The music is gorgeous. The costumes are really beautiful, and the animated backdrop is breathtaking. But beyond the stories and the surface beauty, you have this rich, virtuous message behind it of these ancient ideas that were once the core of traditional Chinese culture and are really universal. Ideas like integrity and courage and compassion and loyalty and faith and on and on. And that really resonates with people. So they come to see the show thinking they're getting a cultural experience, and they are. But a lot of people in their reviews will talk about how they felt it was an uplifting performance and resonated with them on that deeper level. So, and it's a new performance every year. So that's what we do. That's our show. We travel with it all over the world. 200 so cities around the world. We have 8 companies touring at the same time, and we do this performance about 2 hours long.
How do you manage the logistics of that? With the so do you get any actual like on-site harassment at all from Chinese influence?
Yes. So I'll give you a bit of an outline of how this came about. So when we first started, uh, you know, 18 plus years ago, 2007, the first thing they did was they would have their ambassadors and consul generals, and this happened everywhere, writing letters to the theaters saying, "This is an anti-China show. You got to cancel it. This will be bad for U.S.-China relations, England-China relations, whatever it was." And I actually have a website where I document all this. And I started seeing this really around 2010, 11. It was becoming more and more prominent. So I started writing this stuff down. I kept track of it. I got 130 of these cases already on my website. Often we have copies of the letters. The theater will give it to us. So the theater will get the letter. The local mayor will get the letter. If it's a capital city of a country, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will get the letter. Ministry of Culture. This did not work for the most part in strong democracies. It worked a little bit in Eastern Europe in the former Soviet bloc. Uh, for example, we went to Moldova. We were going to perform in Chisinau, Moldova in 2010. We drove over from Turkey, where we just performed, and that was a rough trip by bus from Turkey to Moldova. I mean, those roads are not good. Going through Bulgaria and Romania. Oh my God. I hope they've improved them. And the people were super nice, but the roads, just one pothole after another. The driver was looking at the potholes. Nobody was paying attention to the road. Just so we finally get to Moldova the night before. And the next morning, 7 o'clock, we show up at the theater. And the guard says, "I'm sorry, your show's been canceled." I said, "What do you mean? We just drove here 3 days. We got the tickets are sold out. We got 2 shows are sold out." I said, "No, no, no. Wait for the manager to show up." The manager shows up and she drives and said, "No, your shows are canceled. Go away." We said, "This is impossible." And so as they're trying to figure this stuff out, I'm going to get a coffee with another couple of performers. And we go to this Starbucks equivalent in Chisinau, and we're sitting there, and this woman comes in and she identifies, okay, there's not that many Chinese people in Chisinau at the time. She says, "Oh, are you with Shen Yun?" They say, "Yes." She says, "I'm with the mayor's office. Let me tell you what happened." And she tells us the whole story of how the Chinese embassy visited the mayor's office and pressured them to cancel it. And then the mayor would go with the embassy and the foreign ministry to the theater and pressured this manager to cancel the shows. And he went over time and time again. She said, "I was holding the position that you should not cancel the show because you have a contract. So I told the manager, do not cancel it. You have a contract. Nobody's going to come to protect you when you're being sued." But they canceled it last minute. And so instead of performing at 7 o'clock, we went to the front steps of the theater. And as audience members started rolling in, kids in bow ties and girls in their pretty dresses and parents, and they had flowers. And we had a press conference. We said, "The show's canceled. We're really sorry." And we just kind of stood there and mingled with the audience members. We ended up, the local presenter, because we don't actually book the shows themselves. There's always a local presenter that invites us, ended up suing them. I don't know what ended up happening with that lawsuit. It was dragging on for a while. But what we did find out was that the CCP had promised Moldova €1 billion right before that for development. Moldova never got the money. But of course, that was the carrot that was waved in front of them. And of course, the stick was a warning of that being removed. And they fell for it, canceled the show, never got the money. That's an example. We've had that happen in South Korea. We were actually going to perform in Hong Kong, and we had 7 sold out shows in Hong Kong. This is before the most recent full takeover of Hong Kong. This was 2011. And we were on stage. We had just finished a rehearsal. We had this really great performance for Hong Kong. We at that point had done 4 tours, and we took the best pieces from each tour and put them together, like in this kind of like transformer sort of a way to make the best of the best show. And we just finished the rehearsals. The dancers had their bags packed for the airport, and as we're on stage debriefing after the performance, the dancers are still sweating and panting. Somebody from our administration came and said, sorry, they will not issue visas for the key members of the performance. And they cancel it and they claim it's a technical thing. Oh, the theater and whatever, you have to hire, whatever, all this stuff. It was just clearly an excuse. And they often try to say, oh, there's air conditioning being installed in the theater, therefore you can't perform. And then we find out that they actually have another performance that they booked instead of us after they canceled hours. So this was one form, and that does not work in most democracies. So in Australia, for example, we were performing in Canberra, right there in the middle of the capital. And after the performance, I walk out to the hotel we were staying nearby. I'm walking with my MC partner, a Chinese lady, and we're walking, and this woman and a man stop us, and they say, "Oh, great job! We really enjoyed the show. We're Parliament members." They say all the Parliament members got the letter from the embassy saying, "Do not see the show." And I'm like, "Oh, this is interesting. Let's go check it out." And they said, we had so many parliament members at your show. We had a quorum. We could have passed legislation. We had so many people at your show because it just completely backfired. So the CCP was giving us this kind of free advertising for the most part by telling people what to watch and what not to watch. And they would do this with TV stations in Prague, for example. They told, do not cover this, do not sponsor this. So Prague invited us to come on their show to talk about it. Then they switched tactics. Although some people are still going through the motions and sending out these letters, I think they kind of have to do it, but that doesn't work. So then they started slashing our tires on our buses, and we discovered a few of these at the same time. And with just a pre-trip inspection is happening in Ottawa. And so, bus drivers are supposed to do a pre-trip inspection, same with the trucks, and they see this cut on the side of the tire. And this is interesting. So they take it to a shop, and the mechanic says this cut is very unusual. It was not cut in such a way. It's clearly done by a knife. It's this kind of round cut into the tire. Was done in such a way that it would not deflate right away, but would burst at high speeds on the
Yeah.
highway. This is on the front right tire of a bus that carries 40 people on the highways of Canada.
Yeah.
We discovered a similar cut on our truck the next day. In Little Rock, we had a flat tire actually from Memphis to Little Rock the same day. And then this is actually resurfaced again lately. And of course, it's not the Chinese ambassador out there with a pocket knife doing
No,
this.
no, no.
They have tiers of people who do stuff for them. And then their latest, then it evolved more into, because we're still growing this entire time. When I started, we were one group. The next year, we added another touring group. Now we have two companies. Now we have eight. And, we go from kind of being volunteers, just starting this to actually, okay, fully salaried. And then now there's schools that are training the next generation of dancers that work, that easily have a good path of getting into Shen Yun. And we're just doing better and better. Our billboards are everywhere. We're performing in front of over 1 million people a year. And whatever they're doing as their work is keep changing their tactics. So then they tried doing this thing, the 50-cent army. They're online commentators, supposedly the Wumal, they're called. They get 50 cents a post. Maybe it's an hour. I don't know what they get paid, but they're called the 50-cent army. And so you see all these negative reviews about Shen Yun that are very pretty much copy pasted from one place to another, which is amazing because I'm on stage at the end of the performance. I'm looking out at the audience. Everybody's
Yeah.
standing and applauding. As I go through the lobby, people are stopping me how much they love the show. And you go online, it's all this negative stuff. And we suspect they also were able to manipulate somehow, at least for a period of time, Google's search result algorithms.
Oh, without a shadow of a
Because you'd
doubt.
have like the Chinese embassy page very high up on Google above the fold. And then all these other articles are not going anywhere. And they did that for a while. And then now, actually, we've had an escalation that marks a new phase of what they're doing. And this started last year. They're trying to weaponize social media and mainstream media in the West to turn public opinion against Shen Yun and more broadly against Falun Gong. Their main target is the United States, but we're seeing it play out throughout the world. And their goal is to create a conflict. This is all from leaked documents from the Ministry of State Security. It's like the CCP's KGB type operations. And we had these from multiple sources, two different sources for this conversation, and another one who said that Xi Jinping was behind it. That's a third source. And they said, here's what we're going to do. We're losing the battle against Falun Gong and Shen Yun. We need to up it because, and this is where it gets really interesting geopolitically, we're planning on taking over Taiwan. And if we do that, there's so many Falun Gong practitioners in Taiwan. We see what a headache they are in China. Now they're going to be the biggest resistance against us when we take over Taiwan. So to destroy Falun Gong from the root, we have to get them in the United States, where the headquarters of Shen Yun are, where Falun Gong's leader is. We have a lot of support from the government across different administrations. So we're going to do this, and we're going to try to do it through lawfare, frivolous lawsuits, and we've seen several of those already, through trying to get investigations from the federal government or state government against Shen Yun, and from social media and mainstream media. And so they have a couple of influencers in Chinese who are aligned with them, and they named them and they said, we got to support these people. One of them's in the US. And this person then tried to bring in some people and then try to introduce them to the media and try to get all this negative stuff about Shen Yun from basically a handful of former performers who were disgruntled. Some of them, whom I think all of them I know. And they try to use their story, saying, "Oh, it was hard, and performing was hard, and we worked long hours." Yeah, it's an elite performing arts company. What did you
Yeah.
expect? And
Yeah.
it's not for everybody. That's fine. You said you want to go, you left. That's perfectly fine. A lot of people try to get in here and can't. And so we can get into that if you'd like. So basically, all this stuff is their campaign, and so we've seen that. And then the other thing that we're getting now is death threats. And we had some over the years, but now they're at our headquarters. They're daily, and I'm tracking all of them. And it could get worse and worse. And they're like, we're gonna burn your place down, and we're gonna kill the family members. They're gonna have inexplicable car accidents, and their houses will burn down. And we're gonna kill the congressmen who support you and celebrities. It just gets more and more desperate. So far, fortunately, only pranks, but it's definitely made us look at our security operations and making sure we got everything covered. And that's the kind of stuff that they're doing. It's all linked to this idea of basically shut up and stop doing what you're doing. And that's what we're facing. We're not shutting up.
So I suppose the question is, what is it they're afraid of from a dance group? And I know that oversimplifies
Yeah,
it, and it's not meant as an insult. But
yeah,
if you look at the global scale of China and then you guys, and I do mean that respectfully,
yeah,
it's an awful lot of
yeah. Of
attention.
course,
Do you know what I mean? For something that could be described as a dot on the map.
yes. We're dealing with the most powerful in terms of numbers and military and finances dictatorship in human history, as far as we know. You
Yeah,
know, I mean, you're by Stonehenge, so we don't know about previous civilizations, but in this current round of civilization, at the very least, and here we are, performing arts company, dancers and musicians. Well, first of all, so art is very powerful. And this is something I didn't realize to go back to my conversation
yeah,
back when I was being recruited to do this one performance. It moves people in a way that sometimes is very difficult to achieve through, let's say, academic literature or a news story. When you see something through dance and music and it touches you deep inside, there's a certain understanding of basic truths of humanity that are conveyed better through body language in a way. Just like
yeah.
how most of our communication, is nonverbal. It's the same with dance and music, but it's heightened because the art is so
It's
beautiful.
evocative.
So I would say they're absolutely, and it's memorable,
Yeah,
and that's why film is so powerful too, and stories in general. And so I would say there's two things they're really afraid of. Okay, at the very very surface level, we portray on stage the Communist Party's persecution of people of faith in China, and we show how brutal it is, and we show how courageous these people resisting it are. It's very clear who's good and who's bad, and it is one of the most memorable pieces for audience members that moves them to tears night after night. And this is something they've been covering up in the case of Falun Gong for 25 years, saying it does not exist, saying it's been crushed, saying it's just some weird cult, and that we're doing
yeah,
China a favor and the world a favor. And so that narrative completely falls apart because also the Shen Yun performers are Falun Gong practitioners, and it was started by Falun Gong practitioners. And they're trying to portray them as this weird group. And here they are, these beautiful, smiling dancers who are athletic and happy and energetic. And you can talk to them after the show, and the music they play is beautiful. And it's like these look like really good people, real well balanced people with talent. They don't like the weird. They don't look weird at all. So the whole narrative of the propaganda falls apart. And then you go deeper and you say, okay, the foundations of Chinese civilization for thousands of years were Confucianism and Buddhism and Taoism, and the idea that there's more to life than meets the eye. There's an expression in Chinese, 三十头上有神灵. There's 3 feet above your head. There's deities, let's say, who are watching everything you do, even your thoughts, and they're keeping record. And this is something we find in various in Judeo-Christian traditions as well, right? But it's described differently in the Chinese sort of a
yeah.
way. And then the idea that when you die, you're going to see your ancestors, and you're going to have to be accountable. How did you do? Did you hold up our reputation? And there's heaven and there's hell and there's reincarnation if you're a Buddhist, or there's uh, finding a way to immortality and uh, rejoining, becoming to harmony with the Tao or the way in Taoism. And all of these, what they have in common is the idea of consequences and positive and negative retribution. And that is antithetical to Marxism, which is all about here's what you got right now. And so you can't get students to beat up their teachers in the Cultural Revolution if you have this strong sense of respect for your elders, which you had through Confucianism for thousands of years. And you can't get kids to turn in their parents as, counter-revolutionary if you have this strong filial piety. And so the Communist Party had to wipe that out in order to sustain its legitimacy, in order to claim, we will bring you a new and better China, but we got to get rid of all this old stuff first. And here Shen Yun is saying, no, 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 that is actually real traditional Chinese culture. And then you have people in the West, your CEOs, your Hollywood producers, your government officials, presidents, queens, and all these different celebrities and royalties coming to see Shen Yun. And they're saying, yeah, we're with Shen Yun on this. We're not with the CCP when it comes to this
Yeah.
moment in history. And then you have Chinese people who come to see the show too. And that's not a small part of their fear either. And the Chinese people who can afford to, they will fly to Taiwan, where we perform, where it's still free as of now, in February 2025. And we perform 40 something sold out shows across Taiwan. And a large contingent of the audience are people from China who flew over, especially to see Shen Yun. And we've had people from the Public Security Bureau come to us after the show and say, listen, we were sent here to spy on you, but you're doing a great job. Keep it up. We hope you come to China soon. We get these emails from China all the time. When are you coming to China? We can't wait for you to come to China. And people will
They
say,
need to
like,
check the history.
yeah, yeah. So that's what they're afraid of is real traditional Chinese culture returning. And then people say, well, wait a minute, what are we doing this with this Soviet, idea?
Mm.
What are we doing with Stalinism? And what good has this brought us? So that's what they're really afraid of. It completely dismantles their narrative of the new and better China. And I think people in the West, you start by talking about this, about how people are talking about China and the sphere talking about it. A lot of that has changed the last few years with COVID, with Hong Kong. Now we have all these other things too, in terms of, the more we get into it, there's a lot more to it to unpack. But basically say, okay, this whole dream that we had with the new China, that doesn't seem to be happening. In fact, Xi Jinping seems to be going in a Maoist direction even more. And we can't trust this. So what is the real China? Where's our future with China? Because it's so important to the world, obviously, in so many different ways. And Shen Yun is showing you what China could be like without communism. And that's inspiring to Chinese people and non-Chinese and terrifying to the CCP.
Yes, if only there was a way to tell if there was a potential wave or movement in China, and just what that would be, because I mean this comes down to the kind of, it's a classic cliche, but it's when people say it's, power corrupts and corrupts absolutely, it's the fear of losing power that corrupts. And this is kind of
Mm-hmm.
where you are with China. They're so afraid of losing power. There's probably
Yes.
a genuine argument that if they embraced it, it would make them stronger.
What a missed opportunity, right? All they had to do is say, this is great. Okay, it came outside of China. Fine, so that's not part of our monopoly. But okay, you're reviving traditional China. Come to Beijing.
Yeah,
Come
yeah.
perform in the Olympics. Come perform. And the same can be said about Falun Gong in the 1990s. So Falun
Mm,
Gong is part of this ancient tradition of spiritual cultivation. It is
mm.
very much common to Buddhism and Taoism, and a lot of it was passed on from one master to one disciple for many, many generations. But in the 70s and 80s, you have this big Qigong boom with 100 million people going to the park every morning and doing these slow moving exercises. And I saw this actually throughout East Asia. And at the very tail end of that, Falun Gong is introduced to the public and say, okay, Qigong is actually not just for making your body healthy, but it's actually for spiritual elevation. It's a self refinement, a spiritual, moral
Yeah,
um, improvement practice. And of course, it's good for your health too. And we have exercise, but that's not really what it's about. And it becomes incredibly popular. First of all, because at that time, the Qigong boom in China was very messy. There were a lot of sham Qigong masters, a lot of people obviously using it to make money and claiming this and that and the other thing. There were people having all kinds of phenomenal experience, and people claiming they were being possessed by spirits, and people, all these different things. And Falun Gong comes and basically, okay, it's free. Yet there's a book, but it's very cheap, or you can download it. It's free. Go practice. And it becomes very popular, and all the other Qigong starts fading away. And by 1999, you have 70 to 100 million people practicing Falun Gong in China within 7 years. And there were members of the Politburo who's had family members practicing Falun Gong. They all knew what it was. Nobody saw it as a conflict that you're a Communist Party member and you practice Falun Gong. You go, you do your exercise, you go to work. You could do yoga and be a Republican. You could do Pilates and be a Democrat. Whatever. And so it wasn't a conflict. But then Jiang Zemin, at the head of the Communist Party, instead of saying, "Hey, this is cool. This is something that's really Chinese, and it's making people healthier and happier and better workers," and there's all these in the late 90s, all these reports in Chinese media saying how beneficial Falun Gong has been to China. And there's stuff about their health, and the sports administration gives them all these awards. And instead of saying, "This is great," he says, "No, no, no. Too many people doing something that's not part of the Communist Party. There's more people practicing Falun Gong than the 66 million Communist Party members at the time. We have to ban it. We'll crush it within 3 months." And he says, if the Chinese Communist Party cannot defeat Falun Gong, it will be the biggest embarrassment for Marxism and the Communist Party. And he pits the whole state apparatus against Falun Gong. And these people overnight are enemies of the state. And then, of course, they've not been crushed 25 years into it. But what a missed opportunity for China. And then again with Shen Yun, you have this beautiful performance celebrating this heritage. Why not embrace it? No, we have to crush this too. And they're not. I mean, we
Yeah.
did not start Shen Yun, and I was there from the beginning, with the explicit or even implicit purpose of taking down the Communist Party or making them afraid of us. The mission was to bring back traditional culture and to show
Yeah.
what's happening in China today. And that's what we've always done. That's never changed. But just that alone is a big enough threat, so they think.
Well, because that's the irony. If they'd ignored you, you'd have less volume.
Yeah, maybe, maybe.
No,
We would
but
definitely be
but
getting
but
less of this kind of press.
but that's what I mean. It's
Yeah,
their intent to take you down that gets celebrities, politicians involved. It
sure. I mean, there's also things where if they listen, I mean, with the artists that we have right now, the vast majority of the dancers are ethnic Chinese. We have some who are not. We
Yeah,
have a lot of mixed ones as well. But if we actually could recruit from China, where you have over 1 billion people, and many of them, and many very accomplished artists who could join us, we would have more, not 8 companies, you might have 80 at this point. We could do it on a
yeah,
much larger scale. And we can't. Some people have tried to come out, and the people have been arrested just trying to join us. And people
oh,
have been blocked at the border. And I know people who tried several times to come out and
yeah.
finally got out through Hong Kong.
But when they go to
So,
other
so that's
other
where we,
countries, but when they actually go to other countries and try and tackle you head on, they're bringing attention to the
yes.
very thing you're
Oh, yeah.
highlighting, and it's just like they could just actually ignore you, and if somebody said something, you could just say, "Yeah, but look at how Democrats and Republicans behave to each other. You all think you're telling the truth. Why do you think it's any different with those guys?" They could really just flip it off.
Exactly. They're in a way making
Yeah,
they're in a way making the point that they're trying so hard to avoid,
they're making the
right? They're trying
case
to make,
for
oh,
you.
we're normal like everybody else. Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't see other governments going around trying to stop performing arts countries around the world. I mean, not to say that the CCP is the only one doing this kind of transnational stuff, but they're definitely the leaders in every single
oh
way.
yeah,
I mean, it's been so much in the United States. We have this term now, transnational repression, foreign malign influence. There's offices in DC specifically dealing with this, and this is almost entirely CCP and a bit Russia, right? But it's they're far advanced. They have the United Front and they have their agents. I'll give you an example. After a couple of years of investigation, the FBI finally caught two Chinese agents whose purpose was to take down Shen Yun. And one of the things they were trying to do was stir up these frivolous lawsuits, one after the other. They keep getting dismissed. And eventually, the way that they caught them was they had an undercover tax agent, an IRS agent, who was not actually an IRS, he was an FBI agent, pretending to be a tax agent with the IRS. This Chinese agent, John Chen, tried to bribe him to revoke our nonprofit status, which of course gives us a lot of advantages being a nonprofit
yeah.
organization in terms of taxes. So he tried to get that revoked. And of course, he was trying to bribe a federal agent, and now he's arrested and put in jail and got sentenced and everything. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. And we've in the states now we've found multiple agents lately working under governors' offices, mayors' offices, in the media, all over DC, in universities, in tech, everywhere. It's a massive infiltration. And like you must have seen in Moscow back in the day, and what the Russians have done, the way that they use agents, these people will move to another country and set up an entire life
Mm.
and they get married and they have kids. It's not that their marriages are fake and that they don't love their kids. It's just they have these two parallel lives at the same time. There's this front which they live and they're committed to, and at the same time there's this whole other reality of who they're reporting to, where their money comes from, and what they're actually tasked to do. And they may become American citizens or British citizens, but they're actually working for the CCP the entire time, and they know it. And so more and more we're discovering what they are. Um, we're just going to keep performing in the meantime, and they can do whatever they want. I'll tell you that the dancer's real dream, a lot of the dancers that I talk to, is to bring the performance back to China someday, to bring Chinese culture back to the Chinese people. That's what drives them. When the going gets tough and they're like, "Is this worth it?" Like, yeah, that's our dream. And in the meantime, it's being celebrated everywhere, all over the world.
And that's a perfect place to stop. And there you have it. And what can you say? I mean, Shen Yun, do you know what? We all talk about culture and how important our history is, and how important our culture is. And we often, I mean, I'm a fan of the Chinese history. We all kind of get wrapped up in the culture, the, how would you describe it even? That culture, but it's the comic culture, the fan culture. It's none of it's real because none of us have been to China, none of us have lived in their history. But we have this stereotype of what Chinese culture is supposed to be like in all of the films, all of the myths, all of the legends, all of the health practices from Tai Chi, acupuncture, the dance, the dragons, the good fortunes, the superstitions. And yet, if you knew anything about China at all, you'd know they're not allowed to practice their own history, their own culture. They're not allowed to be Chinese. We are fortunate, even though we don't realize it. We are very fortunate in this country. And that's anywhere in the West, even if we don't believe it. But that's enough from me. And hopefully I'll get to talk to more people from the Shen Yun performance group. And please do check them out. The links will be in the description. And as I always say, thank you very much for watching, for listening, for the support. And wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.